morning, good afternoon, good evening. Zimbabwe is a failed state. We have said this so many times on this platform. We say it because it is true. We're saying it because it must be said. Very soon, the country will become a de jure one-party dictatorship, as contrasts to what we have been since 1980, a de facto one-party state. With the passing of the Constitutional Amendment Bill number 3. What we would like to consider this evening is, how did we get here? Could all this have been avoided if we had done the right thing at the various stages in our history? Could this have been avoided? Did we need to travel down this road? I'd like to emphasize that in 1980, Zimbabwe had the potential to become the South Korea of Africa. Right now, if we had achieved that, we would be enjoying a very high standard of living. We would have a GDP of maybe 20,000 per capita. Whereas in reality, at the present moment, the GDP per capita in Zimbabwe is 2,000. And 49% of the population are living in abject poverty. That is the backdrop of this discussion. Welcome to the program, Ben.
Good day to you and good day to our viewers. Thank you for joining. Now, I'm glad we started from the very beginning, 1980, because I think that is where we got off from the wrong foot, and it has been downhill ever since. Just after the war, ZANU-PF made it very, very clear that it was them that was going to rule the country, or the Bush War was never going to stop. I think that was the handwriting on the wall to say whatever we were fighting for during the War of Liberation was now and void. Because if we went to war and said we wanted to have a meaningful say in who governs the country, we wanted to have one man, one vote, ZANU-PF closed that door at that very moment when they said it is us and nothing else. And unfortunately, we couldn't see through or read through the lines. And once we became a one-party state, and let me go ahead and actually, there is a video that Mugabe actually states that one party, one country, one party, one leader. He actually commanded that during their ZANU-PF rally or gathering. So that day alone is closed the door on democracy and closed any any reason for our fighting, but we just could not see or read through the line.
I think one of the things about Zimbabwe is by the time we gained our independence, white supremacists like Ian Douglas Smith had predicted that Zimbabweans, if there was black majority to rule, blacks will be walking on raw sewage and think it normal. As much as many of us dismiss that as racism, it was racism. There's no doubt about it. But nonetheless, when you look back on history, the last 46 years have been a disaster. There is nothing to be proud of. Maybe our reaction at that time was the wrong one. We should have said, yes, this is a racist remark, but could there be some truth in it? And if there is, what are we going to do to make sure that it doesn't happen? And right along the line, these last 46 years, we should have been going back to those remarks and saying, well, with those white supremacists like Ian Douglas Smith, both are in South Africa, were they right? And more significantly, can we do something and prove them wrong? Not just prove them wrong as racists, but for our own good. And I think our failure to address that problem honestly has been one of the reasons why Zimbabwe is a failed state, why we are in this mess. At the heart of it is our failure to look ourselves in the mirror and be honest with ourselves. When we were doing wrong, we should be honest and say we are doing something wrong here. Whereas the tendency has been to either find a scapegoat, and definitely blaming the whites has been a favorite one. ZANU-PF has made it an art. They blamed sanctions, they blamed the West, they blamed the British for everything. But they've never wanted to take full responsibility for the country's failures. And this has not helped us. This has only helped us to land us into this mess and to let the racists have the final word. They can now turn around and say, well, look, I told you. These blacks cannot manage themselves. They cannot govern themselves. And as blacks, I think we have a serious problem. Africa as a continent has got everything we want. And yet, the continent has forever been the most backward. When there is disease, a disease outbreak, it ravages Africa. Hunger, civil war. We seem to have endless problems. We need to accept that we have failed to govern ourselves and be honest with ourselves. I think that, to me, is probably the starting point.
I think, our problem is ZANU-PF has made its intentions or its evil intentions known before they act on it. I mean, I mentioned, what they said and what Mugabe said at independence, that, it's going to be a one-party state. It's going to be them and nothing else. That should have been the red flag. And we should have addressed that. No, hold on a minute. We went to war together. And we fought for reasons A, B, C, D, and not what you are saying. People should have made their intentions and stood their ground when ZANU-PF was still at its early stage. But we failed to do that. And then just a few years later, they went on to massacre people. And we didn't do anything about it then. So the problem is we know what is going on, but we always fail to address it. We always fail to address it. And we wait until the situation is no longer controllable and has practically gotten out of our reach to say, oh, now let's gather together. Let's see what we can do as a people. And from there, it is already confusion, because now you're just, moving from pillar to post, trying to figure out how to stop what ZANU-PF has done. But we could see the handwriting was there on the wall. Taking a look at this, amendment bill that they want, it was there right at the very beginning. When they started saying 2030, Idi Anenge Ashiripo, people should have asked, how on earth, when he's supposed to be gone by 2028, if he gets elected on the next term? And we did not address that. Yet we sang with him and we were happy. Ndara Wachu Achawuya, that was our song, opposition and all. Every Zimbabwean, most Zimbabwean out there sang that song. So we could not again read in between the lines and see the red flags before they became physical. Now we are at that stage where it's now, full blown. We want to now look for avenues to start stopping it when we could have stopped it at the very beginning.
I just wanted to play this video clip of Margaret Thatcher, former British Prime Minister, the late, in which she's talking about why some nations prosper and others don't.
Countries are not rich in proportion to their natural resources. If they were, Russia would now be the richest country in the world. Angola would be very rich, and there are many other countries that have a lot of natural resources, but they have not had an enterprise economy to develop those resources. Russia has everything: oil, gas, diamonds, platinum, gold, silver, timber, marvelous soil, but has been poor. She's also, on the second point, got very bad environment. The Aral Sea. I remember going to one communist country in about the 60s and seeing a puddle coming out of a chimney of brown gas, which of course is a nitrous gas. And I was absolutely horrified. I said, well, what are you doing letting that happen? The lungs of the people must be terrible. This is acid. You can't let that go on. Tact has never been my strong point, as you know. And it is the countries that have had the wrong system, which have not created the wealth, have not cared about people. Look at the other side. Japan, no natural resources. Switzerland, no natural resources. Taiwan, no natural resources. It is the political system which enhances the enterprise of the people and gives it the framework within which to operate, which will deal with this poverty.
That is undeniable. That is the truth. We have failed ourselves by failing to address those fundamental problems. How can somebody in this, the 21st century, be calling such a structure home? And yet, this is where the majority of our people in the rural areas live. This is the 21st century. And what is more depressing is that this is deliberate. ZANU-PF wanted people to continue to live in these mud huts. We have said on numerous occasions on this platform that soon after independence, the economist the late John Robertson, approached Robert Mugabe and told him that if he was to give the people in the rural areas title deeds to even a few acres of land on which their mud hut is built, these people will build better structures for themselves. The banks will have the confidence to lend them some money because the building they are building will be part of the collateral. If you have got title deeds, you can claim that this is my property. It's collateral. But when you don't have title deeds, you cannot do that. The banks will not give you even a few pounds. Ironically, Ian Smith was told the same plan in the 70s, and he rejected it. And his argument was very simple. If I was to give the blacks title deeds, that would tantamount to economic empowerment. And an economically empowered black populace will tomorrow be demanding political empowerment. And he was not prepared to let the blacks have a meaningful say in the governance of the country. And for that reason, he refused to give the blacks title deeds. Mugabe refused to give blacks title deeds for the same reason, for the same selfish reason. And so we still have millions of our people living in abject poverty, calling a structure like this their home. All for the sake of political control. ZANU-PF wanted to control these people, and that is the only surest way it could achieve that. When you're looking at somebody like him, you can't frog march him to attend ZANU-PF rallies. You can't frog march him to vote for ZANU-PF. He is totally dependent on the regime. Economically empowered, it will be a different thing. The other day we showed some videos of houses being demolished because the regime said those people did not have the right to build those houses. A decent house is being demolished because you don't have title deeds. And no one in the rural area has title deeds. That is a fact. 46 years after independence, they are still being denied title deeds to even 1 acre of land. When you're talking of somebody like that, can you seriously expect this uncle of mine? He could be my cousin. He is somebody's cousin. He is somebody's uncle. And there are millions of them. Do you seriously expect them to stand up to ZANU-PF? The answer has got to be no. ZANU-PF is deliberately keeping them poor for their own selfish reasons. And this control has been extended to churches. The people in the various churches have been brainwashed to the point of becoming utterly useless. They will never hold Mnangagwa to account. And yet that is what is required for a healthy and functioning democracy. The people must hold the leaders to account. The leaders serve the people, not the other way around. But in Zimbabwe, the leaders are so powerful, they dictate to the electorate. And to ask then, how is it possible that these people are approving this constitutional amendment bill, is to miss the point completely. ZANU-PF wants the constitutional amendment bill, and they're just telling people to rubber stamp it. That is the tragedy of Zimbabwe.
You know, it's unfortunate that you find that Zimbabweans are the most naive and most gullible, people out there. You know how one can say the Second Republic is doing wonders is beyond comprehension. When you look at the fact that there's really no difference between the First Republic and the Second Republic. They're the same actors, same movie playing out, basically it's the same people. Our benchmark should be, and rightfully you mentioned that it is at the very beginning when we inherited the country with a GDP of 6,000 per capita. That is our benchmark, because that is when we started to rule ourselves. What ZANU-PF has done from 1980, because it was ZANU-PF that started in 1980, up till this day, it's ZANU-PF. Whether it is the first or the second or the third, it doesn't matter, because they were all in there. Mnangagwa was in there as Mugabe was doing his thing, and they were doing it probably together. And most of the ZANU-PF, top chefs were in there. There's nothing that has changed. So how can we then say there is improvements? Improvements from where? From 1980 or improvements from 2008? Because I think 2008 is the worst we could have, been. 2007, 2008, that was the darkest spot for us, as a country. So where are the improvements, and what are you measuring it against? Against a country that was supposed to be Singapore, at 1980. And people now actually celebrate boreholes. People celebrate public toilets being commissioned. People celebrate being given chicken and chips at rallies to say, this is food for the angels, sapatina, chicken and chips. I mean, that just shows that we are one of the most poorest countries out there if you haven't had chicken and chips or you haven't bought yourself chicken and chips. Seriously, that has got to be the most poorest country out there. So how then are we saying we are doing marvelous when we cannot afford ourselves a packet of chicken and chips? One has to ask that question, since he's doing marvelous. And now that, you commission a few bowls and a few, toilets and an airport and, a roundabout and all those things, they say you have done incredibly well and we must extend a term. I mean, sometimes it baffles you to say, when people speak and say, Zimbabweans are the most learned people out there. I mean, if you cannot see something as far as your nose, I don't think you can see very far. Zimbabwe is a failed state. And if you cannot see that it is a failed state, you will not see the problems and what has caused us to be in this here place and moment. That is exactly where we are. Our problem now is the realization that we have a problem. We have not yet seen it, yet alone to find out why do we have that problem. It will be rocket science for many. And like you said, unfortunately, there are millions of my uncle and there are also aunties out there that really do not know what is democracy, for example. Why Zimbabwe is a failed state. Why Zimbabwe could have been a better country, the next Singapore. Unlike what they are saying, these are marvels right now. So we are at a very, very difficult spot on how can you fix a country when you have millions that are ignorant, naive, and gullible. That is where our problem now is as a country, I believe.
Just want to remind the listeners out there that if you want to join us, you can join us on the link that is being shown at the bottom of your screen there. or if you just want to post your comments, you can also post them on the various medias, and we'll try to share your comments. The other reason why Zimbabwe is a failed state and how we could have avoided becoming a failed state is that at the very onset of our struggle to end white colonial rule, we failed to realize that as much as an armed struggle could be the solution, it could also inherently bring about many problems. What do I mean by that? Well, the armed struggle does throw up leaders who are hawkish, to say the least, who believe that they know best. This is at odds with what we are trying to achieve, with what we wanted for the country. I will emphasize we are a failed state because we have failed to hold free, fair, and credible elections. And the corrupt, incompetent, tyrannical ZANU-PF thugs who have been in power ever since the country's independence have been in power on the basis that they have the divine right to rule. They liberated the country and they now have the right to rule the country. And this is at the heart of why we are a failed state. We can't govern ourselves that way. No one can ever claim that they know everything. And they should not be accountable to anybody. That is the problem. Human beings are human beings. We all fail. Accepting that is at the heart of what it will mean as a nation. In Zimbabwe, we did not have that luck. ZANU-PF thugs have always believed that they have the divine right to rule. And because they carried the gun, they fought the war of liberation. They had the right to rule. And as it became clear that they were winning the liberation war, they turned the gun on the ordinary people with a view of saying to them in no uncertain terms that ZANU-PF must rule or there will be violence. And so we have never had a free, fair, and credible elections, and millions have been denied a meaningful say in the governance of the country. This mentality has been at the heart of ZANU-PF right up to even the present. Here is a video clip a few moons ago of one of the ZANU-PF appointed generals underlying boasting of it.
Saka ZANU-PF ichatonga kusvika madhonge ameranya. Muchida musingadi. Ameni. Apa ndakutaura sakomanda ami. Shashandisa inonzi command voting. Yes. Nyaya yemasabhuku waridzi wemusangano tichazvigadzira. Tinozona? Amen. Vamberi naID Mnangagwa pasi nemhandu wekumasecurity forces. Saka PC mukuru wemaudondini
When you have a regime who firmly believe that they have the divine right to rule, and they've got all the state machinery to impose their will, you know you are in serious trouble. So the road Zimbabwe has traveled these last 46 years is not a surprise at all. We had the misfortune of having leaders who were involved in the liberation war. As much as most of us thought they were heroes fighting for the freedom and liberty of everybody, what they were fighting for is that they should have the undisputed right to replace the white oppressors. So all we managed to do in 1980 is remove one oppressor only to replace him with another. Nothing had changed. And the people, their biggest mistake as a nation we made was to fail to realize that the liberation war had an inherent danger of throwing up leaders who believe they have the divine right to rule. And we failed to realize that problem for the last 46 years because we have not done anything concrete to end this scourge. This whole constitutional amendment bill, number 3, is just Mnangagwa consolidating that belief that ZANU-PF ichatonga kusvika madhonge ameranyanga. The constitutional amendment bill, we have discussed at this platform many times, that as much as we have got a dictatorship already, what it is seeking to do is giving even more dictatorial powers to Mnangagwa and his ZANU-PF colleagues. There is nothing to be gained by the ordinary person from this constitutional amendment bill. Nothing. It leaves us a weaker nation. Like I said, we had a de facto one-party state dictatorship. When this constitutional amendment bill is passed, we'll have a de jure one-party state.
I think that the fact that Zimbabweans believe that participating in rigged elections will solve our problem. Because this is all we seem to do. I will get them at the next election. We will get them at the next election. And, we keep saying the same thing and doing the same thing over and over again. Participating in rigged elections has only cemented ZANU-PF's power and the way they operate. Because once you have a government that rigs elections, that is no longer for the people and by the people, they are basically unaccountable to anybody. They operate as they will, and this is what ZANU-PF is doing. I'm sure everybody can see. You cannot stand up and say what happened to A, B, C, D, or please explain A, B, C, D, because they were never voted by any one of us. They basically, like what, the army general or whoever it was, Sanyatwe, they said, we will operate, the way we see as ZANU-PF, operation, command vote or whatever word he used. That is no longer free will. And we have seen ZANU-PF is prepared to kill, to endanger people's lives to stay in power. And then the question would always come up, and we have always asked this question: why are we participating in rigged elections, knowing fully well that ZANU-PF will get away with it? Because, again, we have been warned to say, stop participating in rigged elections and giving ZANU-PF legitimacy. We have been warned by everybody else around us, except ourselves. We cannot see that. I think this is where our biggest problem is. We have landed ourselves from the from the frying pan into the fire. We thought by liberating ourselves from the oppressive white regime, we were going to get free will, freedom to choose whoever will govern the country. But when you look at it, and like I said, from 1980, Zimbabweans have never experienced that freedom. Straight after that, ZANU-PF went straight for the people and has kept us on our toes till this day. And we still do their bidding. And we still give them legitimacy by participating in rigged elections. When the whole world is saying, stop participating, you are only shooting yourself in the foot. I think if we come to that realization, we have taken a bigger step towards our freedom. I'm not talking about having the answers at the end of the day, but just stopping ourselves from giving ZANU-PF legitimacy. It's a big step towards our own liberation, the true liberation from oppression. That is the first step, the realization. Because a lot of people, 2 million plus, voted for Chamisa on the belief that he was going to win rigged elections, but knowing fully well that it was nonsense. That speaks volumes. I'm not talking about the ZANU-PF members. I'm talking about the so-called opposition members, the so-called people with free will. 2 million of them, plus millions others in the diaspora, were supporting this nonsense, that we can win rigged elections. It can be done. After 46 years of trying, and the world telling us, stop it, you're only hurting yourself, we still continued. I think if we come to that realization, that we are only shooting ourselves in the foot. We are only perpetuating our own suffering. I think that would be the greatest step in our own liberation.
I think the other way we could have stopped, as much as one accepts that we had the misfortune of having in ZANU-PF leaders, thugs, who only believed that they have the divine right to rule. And they were willing to use violence to impose their dictatorial will. Still, ZANU-PF's rule could have been ended. We had the best chance to end it during the 2008 to 2013 GNU. That is a historic fact. It is a pity that many people, many Zimbabweans out there, have failed to see the significance and the importance of the 2008 to 2013 GNU. We had the chance to implement the democratic reforms. We failed to implement even one token reform because Mugabe bribed Morgan Tsvangirai, Tendai Biti, Nelson Chamisa, and all the MDC leaders to forget about implementing reforms. Credit where credit is due. After the 2008 wanton violence, SADC and the AU refused to grant ZANU-PF legitimacy and forced the regime to go into the GNU. The primary purpose of the GNU was to implement the democratic reforms to make sure that the wanton cheating in 2008, the wanton violence in 2008 will never be repeated again. And yet, as soon as Morgan Tsvangirai and company got into power, they started enjoying themselves. They forgot about the reforms. The opportunity to implement the reforms to end the ZANU-PF dictatorship was wasted. That is a reality that we cannot deny. And we cannot pretend it didn't happen. That is an important historic moment in Zimbabwe's struggle. We wasted it. Now it emerges that besides the trappings of high office, MDC leaders were also given farms and other benefits to make them forget about the reforms. Here is a video clip of somebody reminding us that Chamisa sold out.
Nelson Chamisa received a farm in Marondera. Well, everybody needs land, isn't it? But don't you think it was too early for him to receive land from ZANU-PF when millions of people, they were still hoping that he would be the next president? And even worse, his wife received another farm in Chegutu. And the ZANU-PF government, they gave Yeman, the wife of Nelson Chamisa, and she's making a very, very successful chicken business. One family. So we used to say bad things about ZANU-PF, that these guys are so bad. One man can take 21 farms, 40 farms. One man can take other white men's big businesses. One man can take all these mining businesses, the industry, the shops, the banks. They can even a lot.
So the tragedy for Zimbabwe is that we had in ZANU-PF thugs who believe they have the divine right to rule. And while the people risked everything to elect the opposition for the primary purpose that they will implement the democratic changes necessary to end the ZANU-PF dictatorship, the opposition leaders were in turn bribed by ZANU-PF. So we ended up with a situation where the opposition in Zimbabwe is ZANU-PF Team B in all but name. They have never implemented any democratic changes. And they've been participating in flawed elections, knowing fully well that the process is flawed, and knowing fully well that by participating, they are giving ZANU-PF legitimacy. They participated regardless, because they also knew that ZANU-PF was giving away a few gravy train seats, and that's all they cared about. The tragedy for the country is that the ordinary people, millions of people out there, have failed to realize that the opposition are now ZANU-PF in all but name. Even after 26 years, with not even one reform implemented, the people continue to support the opposition, to look to the opposition as the nation's savior, when in reality, they are only helping ZANU-PF to stay in power by making people believe that things will change, when in reality, nothing will change. Ben, do you want to give your closing remarks?
Yes, in closing, I would want to say, I think if we say MDC-CCC forgot to implement reforms, we are giving them leeway. It is important to note that SADC kept on reminding them about reforms when they were in the GNU. SADC kept on pushing them to implement reforms. They pushed so hard that Morgan Tsvangirai went and reported SADC to Mugabe. He told Mugabe, SADC is worrying me about reforms. So we cannot say he forgot when he was reminded. And his MDC-CCC friends were reminded. They just did not want to implement reforms. And I am glad that you used the term to say MDC-CCC is ZANU-PF in all but name, playing for ZANU-PF to win, because that is the truth. And I spoke about the realization. This is another realization that is very, very and equally important to the realization that participating in rigged elections is only shooting ourselves in the foot. This current opposition is now playing for ZANU-PF, is now playing to line up their pockets, is now playing to get their share of the spoils of war. And Zimbabweans need to realize that whatever they are standing for and whatever they are doing is not for you and I, it's for themselves and ZANU-PF. We have to come to that realization. And it's only when you come to that realization that you start looking for solutions. Because right now we are looking for solutions in the wrong place. We are trying to beat ZANU-PF at rigged elections, elections that they control and have a say by themselves. So we are in the wrong place, looking for the wrong solution, looking for the wrong problem. We need to come to the realization that participating in rigged elections, like we are being told by this opposition, is only for them to get seats, MP seats, gravy train seats, and get paid by ZANU-PF for participating and leave us high and dry. And we have seen it. We have seen some people pretending to take sabbaticals to come back and start preaching and telling us, let us continue because it's near election time. We need to wise up. We need to start thinking for ourselves. We need to have free will. That is what the war of liberation was all about anyway. Free will. Free thinking Zimbabwe. Thank you.
We started the discussion on could something be done to stop this constitutional amendment bill going through. I believe the damage was done. We reached a point of no return when the opposition participated in the 2023 elections, giving ZANU-PF legitimacy. After that, ZANU-PF knew it was going to be plain sailing. ZANU-PF blatantly rigged the 2023 elections. SADC and the AU condemned those elections as flawed, but they could not go the extra mile as they did in 2008 and deny ZANU-PF legitimacy because the opposition had participated in those flawed elections. It is important to understand that. And when you think that ZANU-PF wanted this constitutional amendment bill to go through, it is clear there was nothing that was going to stop them doing so. Because the process of rigging a constitutional amendment bill is much easier than rigging elections. When Mnangagwa rigged the 2023 elections, and SADC and the AU condemned the election process as flawed and illegal, he dismissed them with contempt because he knew that the MDC guys, and thanks to leaders like Chamisa, had managed to con people to participate in those flawed elections in their millions. And so SADC and the AU were powerless to do anything else. If Zimbabweans are happy to participate in a flawed process, particularly when they've been warned, as Ben has said repeatedly this afternoon, they've been warned repeatedly, do not participate, because if you participate, you give the process legitimacy. And they participated because they believed Chamisa when he said he had plugged the vote rigging loopholes. ZANU-PF will not rig the elections. So by that time, there was nothing anyone could do to stop this constitutional amendment bill going through. Is everything lost? The answer is no. I still go back to the argument we had at the beginning. We need to free the millions of Zimbabweans who are being held hostage by this ZANU-PF regime. The ordinary Zimbabweans living in abject poverty, particularly those in the rural areas. There is absolutely no justification in this day and age to deny anyone the right to own property. We economically liberate the millions in the rural areas because, trust me, they do not need ZANU-PF's help to build for themselves decent homes. ZANU-PF is the one that is standing in their way, stopping them doing that. If all Zimbabweans were to turn around and say, let's put an end to this nonsense of denying people the right to own a few acres of land on which their mud hut is built. If we can accomplish that, I believe we will be on track to ending this ZANU-PF dictatorship. We can end it. We just need to do the right thing. I repeat, there is no one in this day and age who should be punished by being forced to live in a mud hut in abject poverty. ZANU-PF is doing that for its own selfish reasons. And we need to put an end to it. This madness must stop. Think about it. Thank you very much. Have a good evening.